Hello, brothers, and welcome to Sigma Grandpa channel. Pressure doesn't always break a man. Sometimes it reveals what was already inside him. Think about that for a moment. A watermelon can sit perfectly still on a table. From the outside, it looks ordinary, smooth, solid, nothing particularly interesting. But cut it open and suddenly, you discover what was hiding underneath the surface. People can be exactly the same. And that is where the watermelon effect becomes fascinating, because you can spend months or even years watching a man remain calm, quiet, and seemingly unaffected by what happens around him. Then something changes. He gets betrayed, pressured, provoked, disappointed, tempted, ignored, or simply pushed one time too many. And suddenly something comes out, not necessarily anger. Sometimes it's clarity, sometimes it's distance, sometimes it's a decision so quiet that nobody realizes anything has changed until the door is already closed. Here's the uncomfortable fact. Pressure often doesn't create behavior from nowhere. It can reveal patterns that were already there. And psychologists have long studied how stressful situations can change attention, judgment, emotional responses, and decision-making. So when people say, he changed overnight, they may be describing something that wasn't overnight at all. Maybe the cracks had been appearing for months. Maybe the silence wasn't emptiness. Maybe he was simply collecting information. And here's the funny part. People will often ignore 17 small warning signs, then act shocked by the 18th, as if the 18th sign arrived with a marching band. That is why this isn't another video about pretending to be emotionless, avoiding everyone, or walking around acting mysterious. The real watermelon effect is much more interesting. It's about what happens when life applies pressure to the surface, and what that pressure reveals underneath. Because there are things a Sigma-type man may tolerate that he will never forget, situations that teach him more than advice ever could, and moments that quietly change the way he sees a person forever. And once you understand these 20 effects, you may start looking at silence, pressure, distance, temptation, and even your own reactions in a completely different way. Because sometimes the most revealing moment isn't when a man speaks. It's what you discover when life finally cuts through the surface. Number 1, the seed problem. Small things become huge when you keep feeding them. The most important changes in a man rarely begin with a dramatic event. Sometimes they begin with something so small that nobody bothers to notice it. A disrespectful comment, a broken promise, someone repeatedly crossing a boundary, a friend who only appears when they need something. None of these moments may seem serious enough to cause a reaction. So the Sigma male stays quiet. He doesn't argue over every little thing. He doesn't demand an explanation for every strange behavior. He simply takes note. And that is where people often misunderstand him. Silence doesn't necessarily mean the issue was forgotten. Every repeated incident adds another seed to the soil. One seed means almost nothing, but keep planting the same kind of seed and eventually something has to grow. The brutal truth is that a Sigma male may forgive an individual mistake while becoming completely intolerant of a pattern. The first offense gets an explanation. The second gets attention. The third starts changing his perception. Eventually, he may stop seeing the person through the lens of who they claim to be and start judging them by what they consistently do. Then comes the part that confuses everyone. He pulls away. No dramatic announcement, no angry speech, no 15-paragraph explanation, just less access. By the time others notice the change, the decision may have been forming for a very long time. The seed was planted quietly. The pattern did the growing. Number 2, the thick skin illusion, looking unbothered, can hide what you are recording. One of the biggest mistakes people make with a Sigma male is assuming that a lack of reaction means a lack of awareness. It doesn't. He may hear the insult, notice the disrespect, catch the contradiction, and still say absolutely nothing. Not because he is clueless, but because reacting instantly would give the moment more importance than it deserves. Some people need to respond the second they feel challenged. They explain themselves, defend their position, raise their voice, or demand an apology. The Sigma approach is often different. He watches. He notices who suddenly changes their tone when other people arrive. He remembers who only respects boundaries after being confronted. He pays attention to the person who keeps making small jokes that always seem to land at someone else's expense. And while everyone else assumes the situation has passed, he may still be processing what happened. That's the thick-skin illusion. The surface looks calm, but underneath, information is being collected. The uncomfortable truth is that a person can mistake your silence for permission. They may keep pushing because you didn't react the first time. Then one day they discover that you weren't ignoring the behavior. You were measuring it. And when the Sigma finally changes how much access you have to him, it can feel completely sudden. To him, it probably wasn't sudden at all. You simply weren't paying attention to what he was paying attention to. Number 3, the pressure test. Squeezing harder doesn't always produce a reaction. Pressure reveals something that comfort can easily hide. When someone tries to control a Sigma male through guilt, intimidation, public embarrassment, constant demands, or emotional pressure, they may expect him to react exactly as they would. They push harder, waiting for him to become defensive, desperate, or angry. But sometimes the opposite happens. He gets quieter. That silence can be frustrating because there is nothing obvious to fight. No dramatic argument, no emotional performance, no satisfying reaction. The person applying pressure keeps increasing it, believing that eventually the Sigma will crack. What they may not realize is that every attempt at control is also providing information. The Sigma is watching the method, the timing, the words, and especially the reason behind the pressure. Is someone genuinely asking for something or trying to force an outcome? Is the criticism useful or designed to humiliate? Is the urgency real or manufactured? The more pressure is applied, the clearer the motive can become. And here's the strange part. Sometimes pressure doesn't make an independent person surrender. It makes him reconsider the entire relationship. Once he recognizes that someone needs control more than cooperation, the conversation changes completely. He stops asking, "How do I satisfy this person?" and starts asking, "Why am I allowing this person to have this much influence over me?" That question can quietly end a relationship long before anyone realizes it is ending. Number 4, the cut effect. Once you cut through the surface, you can't pretend you didn't see inside. There is a moment when curiosity turns into certainty. At first, a Sigma male may give people the benefit of the doubt. A strange comment can be overlooked. A contradiction can be explained away. A broken promise can be forgiven. But when the same details keep appearing, something changes. He stops judging each incident separately and starts connecting them. That's when the surface gets cut open. One lie may be nothing. 5 lies that all protect the same story are something else entirely. The uncomfortable part is that discovering the truth can make going back to the old version of the relationship impossible. Once you notice that someone's kindness only appears when they need something, you can't unknow it. Once you recognize that an apology is followed by the exact same behavior, the apology loses its power. This is why some Sigma males seem to change their attitude towards someone without warning. The warning happened internally. They simply reached a point where the evidence became heavier than the excuses. And this isn't about assuming everyone is secretly fake. That's just another form of paranoia. It's about recognizing patterns without desperately trying to make them fit the story you wanted to believe. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't discovering that someone disappointed you. It's realizing that you had already noticed the signs and kept explaining them away. Once the surface is cut, you finally see what's underneath. And after that, pretending becomes much harder. Number 5, the seedless moment. When he stops trying to understand you. There is a difference between being angry with someone and simply no longer caring to understand them. A Sigma male can spend a long time trying to make sense of another person's behavior. He may ask himself why they keep lying, why they keep crossing boundaries, why their attitude changes depending on who is around, or why every simple conversation somehow becomes complicated. At first, he searches for explanations. Maybe they are stressed, maybe they misunderstood, maybe there is something going on that he doesn't know about. But curiosity has a limit. Eventually, there can be a moment when the questions stop. Not because he finally discovered every answer, but because the answers no longer matter enough to pursue. That is the seedless moment. He isn't necessarily furious. He isn't plotting revenge. He may not even want an apology. He has simply stopped investing mental energy into a puzzle he no longer considers worth solving. And this can be surprisingly powerful, because anger still keeps you connected to someone. You think about what they did. You replay conversations. You imagine what you should have said. Indifference does something completely different. It removes their importance. The person may continue explaining, defending, provoking, or trying to regain attention, but the emotional door has already become difficult to open. The real shift isn't, "I hate you." It's, "I no longer need to understand you." And once someone reaches that point, getting their attention back can be far harder than getting it in the first place. Number 6, the sweetness trap. Not everything pleasant is good for you. Pleasant things can become dangerous when you stop asking what they are costing you. Attention feels good. Compliments feel good. Being admired, constantly invited, constantly praised, and treated like you're special can make life feel easy. But the problem begins when comfort quietly becomes dependence. A Sigma male who values independence has to be careful here. He may reject ordinary approval, yet still become attached to a different kind of validation, being admired for being mysterious, intelligent, powerful, successful, or different. The label changes, but the hunger remains. That's the sweetness trap. The most convincing distractions aren't always painful. Sometimes they're enjoyable enough to keep you from noticing that you're becoming dependent on them. A relationship can feel exciting while draining your focus. A friendship can be flattering while subtly controlling your choices. Constant praise can make criticism feel unbearable. Even success can become a trap when you start making decisions just to protect an image you've built. The brutally honest question is this: do I enjoy this or do I need this? Those are completely different things. Enjoyment gives you freedom to walk away. Dependence makes walking away feel like losing part of yourself. A truly independent man doesn't reject pleasure. He simply refuses to let pleasure become his master. Because sometimes the thing that feels sweetest is exactly the thing quietly training you to need it. Number 7, the hidden weight. What looks light from far away can be heavy up close. People are remarkably good at judging what they can see and ignoring what they can't. A Sigma male may look calm, independent, disciplined, and completely in control. Because he doesn't constantly complain, others may assume his life is easy. Because he handles problems quietly, they may assume nothing affects him. That assumption can be completely wrong. Silence doesn't make problems disappear. It only makes them less visible. A man can carry financial pressure, difficult decisions, family expectations, failed plans, loneliness, disappointment, and personal doubts, without turning every struggle into a public announcement. Sometimes the strongest-looking person in the room is simply the person who has become very skilled at carrying things privately. But there is another side to this. Carrying everything alone can become its own weakness. A Sigma mindset should not turn emotional control into emotional denial. Being private is useful. Refusing to acknowledge what hurts is not. There is a huge difference between handling your problems with dignity and pretending you don't have any. The real strength is knowing what deserves to stay private and what needs to be dealt with honestly. Because eventually, hidden weight still affects how you walk. It can make you impatient, distant, suspicious, exhausted, or disconnected without you realizing why. Looking strong is easy when nobody can see the weight. Carrying it intelligently is what actually matters. Number 8, the rotten corner. Principle. One small problem can change the whole experience. A relationship rarely collapses because of one imperfect moment. More often, one small problem becomes dangerous because it keeps returning. A Sigma male may tolerate a mistake without making a scene. People get tired. People misunderstand things. People have bad days. One incident doesn't have to define an entire person. But repetition changes the meaning. The same disrespect delivered in different forms eventually stops looking accidental. The friend who repeatedly breaks promises, the partner who keeps hiding small details, the colleague who constantly takes credit, the person who apologizes beautifully but never changes their behavior. Eventually, the problem is no longer the individual incident, it's the pattern. This is where many people get confused. They point to all the good things the person has done and say, but they're not always like that. Exactly. They don't have to be bad all the time for the pattern to matter. One rotten corner doesn't mean everything about a person is worthless. It means you can't honestly pretend that corner doesn't exist. And if you keep ignoring it, eventually it can affect how you experience everything else. That's why a Sigma male may suddenly become more distant after appearing extremely patient for months. He isn't necessarily punishing anyone. He may simply have stopped separating every incident from the larger pattern. The question has changed from, was that a mistake, to, why does this keep happening? And once that question becomes impossible to ignore, trust can start disappearing quietly, long before the relationship officially ends. Number 9, the refrigerator effect. Distance can preserve a decision better than emotion. Sometimes you don't need another conversation. You need enough distance to hear your own thoughts again. When emotions are high, even a small disagreement can feel enormous. Anger makes everything urgent. Disappointment makes everything personal. Attraction can make obvious problems look harmless. And constant contact gives those emotions no time to settle. That is where distance becomes powerful. A Sigma male may step back, not because he is playing games, but because he wants to separate the person from the emotional noise surrounding the situation. Without constant messages, arguments, explanations, and reactions, his thinking can become much clearer. And something interesting often happens during that space. He starts noticing what he actually misses. Sometimes he misses the person. Sometimes he realizes he only misses the routine, the attention, the familiarity, or the version of himself he was around them. That distinction can change everything. Distance can also expose whether a relationship has genuine value. If removing constant interaction makes you feel peaceful instead of empty, that's information. If someone respects your space instead of desperately trying to control it, that's information too. But distance isn't automatically wisdom. Running away from every difficult conversation isn't maturity. Sometimes problems need to be discussed, repaired, and confronted. The real power is knowing when space creates clarity and when it merely delays responsibility. because emotions can make you defend decisions you don't truly believe in. Distance gives those decisions room to cool down. And sometimes, once the emotional heat disappears, the truth becomes remarkably obvious. Number 10, the temperature test. Character changes when conditions change. You don't really know how someone handles life when everything is going their way. Comfort can hide a lot. The more revealing moments often arrive when something changes. They are ignored. They lose an opportunity. Someone disagrees with them. Plans fall apart. They are told no. Suddenly, the comfortable conditions disappear, and their real habits have fewer places to hide. This is where a Sigma male tends to pay close attention. He may care less about how someone behaves when they are happy, and more about how they behave when they are frustrated. Does the respectful person suddenly become insulting? Does the generous friend become bitter when they aren't rewarded? Does the confident person collapse when challenged? Does the calm person become cruel when they lose control? These moments don't automatically prove someone's entire character. Everyone has bad days. Everyone can lose their temper. The important thing is what happens afterward. Do they take responsibility? Do they correct themselves? Or do they create excuses and blame everyone around them? That's the real temperature test. A person's character isn't measured by whether they ever react badly. It's revealed by what they repeatedly do when circumstances stop being convenient. And this is where observation becomes more valuable than promises. Anyone can describe themselves as patient, loyal, humble, or mature. But change the conditions, remove the comfort, introduce disappointment, and watch what remains. Because character that only survives comfortable conditions isn't character with much strength behind it. The pressure doesn't necessarily create the person. It reveals the person. Number 11, the red flesh principle. Some truths only become visible after you disturb the surface. People can maintain an impressive exterior for a surprisingly long time. They can sound reasonable, appear generous, speak calmly, and tell you exactly what you want to hear. But comfort is often a poor test of character. Change the conditions, and the hidden parts can start showing. A disagreement can reveal how someone handles being challenged. A rejection can expose entitlement. A little competition can uncover insecurity. Giving someone less attention can reveal how much they depended on controlling yours. This is where a Sigma male's observation becomes useful. He doesn't necessarily need to provoke people just to discover their flaws. In many cases, ordinary life creates enough pressure on its own. The important thing is what happens when the surface gets disturbed. Does the respectful person remain respectful when frustrated? Does the confident person accept correction? Does the generous person still help when there is nothing to gain? Does the person who constantly talks about loyalty actually behave loyally when loyalty becomes inconvenient? Those moments can be surprisingly revealing, but there is an important distinction. One bad reaction doesn't automatically expose someone's true self. People can lose their temper, make mistakes, and recover. What matters is the pattern that follows. Do they reflect, apologize, and change? Or do they repeat the behavior and blame everyone else? Sometimes you don't need to dig for hidden motives. You simply need to stop judging people by their best moments and start paying attention to how they behave when life stops being comfortable. That's when the surface gets disturbed and what's underneath becomes much harder to hide. Number 12, the black market attention effect. Some people manufacture drama because attention is their currency. Some people don't actually want peace. They want a reaction. That distinction can save you from wasting enormous amounts of energy. There are people who constantly create little emergencies, start unnecessary arguments, make mysterious comments, disappear just long enough to be noticed, or provoke someone and then act surprised when that person reacts. The goal isn't always the argument itself. Sometimes the real reward is knowing they still have the power to occupy your mind. Attention becomes their currency, and the more emotional the reaction, the more valuable the currency becomes. This is where a Sigma male can make a very different choice. Instead of immediately defending himself, explaining every detail, or trying to win the argument, he may simply refuse to participate in the transaction. No reaction, no performance, no endless explanation. That doesn't mean ignoring every conflict. Genuine problems deserve honest conversations. But manufactured drama is different from a real problem. One seeks resolution. The other keeps moving the goalposts because the conflict itself provides attention. The brutal truth is that some people don't become satisfied when you explain yourself. They simply find another angle to challenge. That's the trap. You keep thinking, if I explain this properly, they'll understand. Meanwhile, they aren't looking for understanding. They're looking for engagement. Once you recognize that pattern, your response can become surprisingly simple. Stop feeding it, because attention is powerful. And when you stop giving someone emotional access to you, you may discover that their power over you was largely powered by your reaction. The watermelon effect was never really about being cold, distant, or pretending that nothing affects you. It is about understanding what pressure, time, distance, temptation, disappointment, and repeated behavior reveal, both in other people and in yourself. Small things can become patterns. Silence can hide observation. Pressure can expose motives. Distance can create clarity. Comfort can disguise weakness, while difficult moments can reveal character that words never could. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: you don't truly discover who you are when everything is going your way. You discover yourself when something pushes against you. That is why a strong man doesn't spend his life trying to avoid every uncomfortable situation. He learns from them. He watches his reactions. He notices what triggers him, what changes him, what tempts him, and what repeatedly drains his peace. Because the goal isn't to become impossible to hurt. The goal is to become difficult to control. So the next time life applies pressure, don't only ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Ask yourself, "What is this pressure revealing about me?" That question can change everything. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And remember, sometimes the surface tells you almost nothing. Pressure is where the real story begins.